My stepmom tried to sell my grandmother's house without telling us. She said, "It's better this way." I showed up at the open house with the deed in hand, and had her escorted out. I didn't think I'd ever have to deal with someone in my own family pulling a stunt this dirty. But here we are. My stepmom, Ramona, decided to sell my grandmother Velma's house without telling anyone. Not Velma, not me, not my aunt, no one. She just went ahead and planned an open house like it was her right to do so. Let me set the stage. My grandma's house isn't just some random property. It's the house she and my late grandfather bought in the 1970s, a beautiful old craftsman in Eugene, Oregon. It's the place where every Christmas, Thanksgiving, and 4th of July happened. It's the house I grew up in when my own parents couldn't get it together. And now, this woman, this stepmom who married into our family less than a decade ago, decided to list it without saying a word. It all started when my cousin Elijah sent me a text. Just a quick, "Hey, what's this about grandma's house?" along with a photo of a flyer for an open house. At first, I thought he was messing with me. Why would grandma be selling her house? She wasn't even living in it at the time because she was recovering from knee surgery in Seattle with my Aunt Phoebe, but selling it? That made no sense. I zoomed in on the flyer, and my stomach dropped. It was her address. Her house. The open house was scheduled for that Saturday. It was Wednesday. I didn't waste time. I called my dad immediately. "Hey, Dad, what's going on with grandma's house? Why is there an open house?" There was a long pause. Ramona didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Well, she thought it might be time to sell the place. Your grandma's getting older, and, you know, the house is a lot to manage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kidding, right? Grandma doesn't even know about this?" "Well, we've been talking about it," he said, stumbling over his words. "Ramona thought it'd be better to just take care of it." "Take care of it? Without telling anyone?" "That's grandma's house, not yours." "Henley, don't make this a big deal," he said, clearly trying to brush me off. "Ramona's just trying to help." "Help? By selling her house out from under her? You can't do that. That's illegal. The house is in grandma's name." Dad sighed heavily, like he was tired of the conversation already. "Ramona thought this would be easier for everyone." "Everyone?" I shouted. "Did it ever occur to you that grandma might not want to sell her house?" "She'll understand," he said weakly. "You'll see." I hung up. My blood was boiling. Next call? Ramona. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why are you selling my grandmother's house?" I demanded. "Oh, Henley," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Velma's getting older. She doesn't need a big house like that anymore." "That's not your call to make," I said through gritted teeth. "She didn't ask you to sell it. She didn't even know you were selling it. You don't have the right." "Well, technically," she said, stretching out the word like it gave her more power, "your dad has power of attorney. It's perfectly legal." "Wrong," I snapped. "Grandma gave me power of attorney last year. I have the paperwork to prove it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Well, I'm sure she didn't mean for you to interfere with what's best for her." "Interfere?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You'd better cancel that open house, Ramona. Right now." "Henley, you're being dramatic," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. "This is for the best. You'll see." She hung up on me. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, trying to calm down. Ramona was unbelievable. She genuinely thought she could pull this off without anyone noticing. Did she really think none of us cared enough to find out? I knew I needed to act fast. First, I found the folder where I kept all of Grandma's important documents. Deed to the house? Check. Power of attorney? Check. Everything was in order. There was no question about it. Grandma was still the sole owner of that house, and I was her legal representative. Next, I called Aunt Phoebe to let her know what was happening. She was just as furious as I was. "That woman is insane," Phoebe said. I knew she was trouble, but this is a whole new level. "What do you want to do?" "I'm going to the open house," I said. "With the deed in hand. She's not getting away with this." "Good," Phoebe said. "Let me know if you need backup." Saturday morning, I got to Eugene early. I parked down the street from Grandma's house so I could watch what was going on without being seen. Sure enough, there were balloons tied to the mailbox and a big open house sign in the yard. Strangers were walking up and down the driveway, stepping inside like they had any right to be there. My stomach churned as I walked up to the house. Every step I took, I got angrier. This wasn't just a house. It was our family's home. And now Ramona had strangers traipsing through it, deciding whether they wanted to buy it. As soon as I stepped inside, I spotted Ramona in the living room. She was wearing one of her ridiculous faux pearl necklaces and chatting with a realtor like she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Henley," she said, forcing a smile. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, holding up the deed. "This house isn't for sale." The realtor looked confused. "What's going on?" "This house belongs to my grandmother," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She didn't authorize this sale, and neither did I. I'm her legal representative, and I have the documents to prove it." I handed the paperwork to the realtor, who scanned them quickly. "If this is true," she said, turning to Ramona, "we can't proceed with the sale." Ramona's smile was gone. "Henley, can we talk about this outside?" "No," I said firmly. "We're not going to talk about this outside. We're going to shut this whole thing down right now." I walked through the house, telling everyone the truth. Strangers looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I told them to leave because the sale was illegal. One by one, people started trickling out. Some were annoyed, but most just looked confused. By the time I got back to the living room, Ramona was fuming. "You had no right to do that," she hissed. "You had no right to sell this house," I shot back. "This is over, Ramona. You're done." I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her win. My grandmother's house was staying in the family, no matter what it took. The fallout from that day was immediate. Ramona stormed out of the house with her fake pearls rattling, practically dragging my dad along like a scolded child. I stayed behind to make sure everything was back in order. I double-checked all the doors and windows, collected every stray open house flyer I could find, and made a mental note to call a locksmith. No way was I leaving anything to chance. That night, I called Grandma to explain what happened. I'd kept her out of it until now because I didn't want to stress her out while she was recovering. But she needed to know what Ramona had tried to do. "She did what?" Grandma's voice crackled through the phone. Even in her 70s, Velma had more fire than most people half her age. "She planned to sell the house without telling you," I said, pacing in my kitchen. "She even had an open house today." Grandma went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I knew Ramona was trouble, but this? She's done. She's never setting foot in that house again. You hear me, Henley? Never. Don't worry, Grandma. She's not getting away with this. I'm going to take care of it." And I meant it. The next day, I filed a police report. What Ramona had done was not only unethical, it was illegal. She'd tried to sell property that didn't belong to her, using forged power of attorney documents my dad must have signed under her direction. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft, it was a long list, and I wanted to make sure she paid for every single thing. I also called my lawyer friend, Gavin, and asked him to help me draft a cease and desist letter. We sent it directly to Ramona, making it clear that she was no longer welcome at Grandma's house and would face legal action if she even tried to set foot on the property again. I copied my dad on the letter to make sure he understood just how serious this was. Then I went a step further. I called every single family member, friend, and neighbor who had ever met Ramona. I told them exactly what she had done and how she had tried to manipulate my dad into going along with her plan. No one in the family liked her to begin with, but this sealed the deal. From that point on, she was persona non grata. Ramona, predictably, tried to play the victim. She sent me a string of passive-aggressive texts about how I had embarrassed her and overreacted, and how she was just trying to help. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I forwarded every single message to my lawyer. Let her dig her own grave. My dad called me a few days later, sounding defeated. "Henley, don't you think this is going too far?" he asked. "Too far?" I said, incredulous. "She tried to steal Grandma's house, Dad. Do you even hear yourself?" "She just made a mistake," he mumbled. "She thought she was doing the right thing." "No, she thought she could get away with it," I snapped. "And now she's dealing with the consequences. If you want to stick by her after this, that's your choice, but don't expect me to let it slide." He didn't have much to say after that. Meanwhile, Grandma decided to take matters into her own hands. She called her bank and flagged every account my dad and Ramona had access to. Then she updated her will and made me the sole executor. She wasn't taking any chances with her assets falling into the wrong hands. A week later, we had a locksmith come out and change all the locks on the house. Grandma gave me the spare keys and told me to hold on to them. "You're the only one I trust now," she said. That hit me hard. I wasn't just doing this for me, I was doing it for her. But the real cherry on top came a few months later. Remember how I said I filed a police report? Well, the cops didn't take kindly to Ramona's little scheme. Turns out, she'd left a paper trail a mile long, and her attempts to fake power of attorney documents put her in hot water fast. By the time they finished investigating, she was facing multiple charges, including fraud and forgery. She tried to weasel out of it, of course. Claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to help Velma, and that she had no idea what she was doing was wrong. The judge didn't buy it. She ended up with a hefty fine and a probation sentence, along with a permanent stain on her record. Grandma and I showed up to every court hearing. We didn't say much, but our presence was enough to remind her who she'd messed with. Watching her squirm in front of the judge was more satisfying than I expected. Ramona's reputation in the family was ruined. No one wanted anything to do with her, and even my dad started keeping his distance after the legal mess. Eventually, he moved out of the house they shared and got a small apartment on his own. I think he finally realized just how toxic she was. Better late than never, I guess. As for Grandma, she moved back into her house once she was fully recovered. She spent weeks redecorating and fixing up the garden, turning it back into the cozy home she loved. And every time I visited, she made sure to thank me for standing up for her. "This house isn't just wood and bricks," she said one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "It's our family. And thanks to you, it's still ours." I smiled, knowing I'd done the right thing. Ramona may have tried to take everything from us, but in the end, all she got was what she deserved.